Hello, welcome. We'll go ahead and get started. On behalf of Save Our Schools Arizona Network and Strategies 360, thank you for joining us. I'm Dawn Penich-Thacker, co-founder of Save Our Schools Arizona, and I'm incredibly honored to welcome you to Reimagining Schools, a return to a new reality, featuring National Equity in Education experts, Chancellor of New York City Public Schools, Richard Carranza, and Professor of African American Studies and Criminology, Dr. David Stovall. There will be 2 opportunities for Q&A, so please feel free to submit questions in the chat. Before I hand it over to another champion of equity in education, Ylenia Aguilar, Vice President of Cultura for Strategies 360, I'd like to remind everyone recording is not permitted and this conversation is off the record. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Dawn. My name is Ylenia Aguilar, and I'm the Vice President of Strategies 360 Cultura and the President of the Osborne School District in Phoenix, Arizona. First of all, I want to recognize and thank Chancellor Carranza and Dr. David Stovall, both of whom found time in their demanding schedules to participate in this much-needed conversation. Muchas gracias. I'm truly honored to introduce an Arizona native, my friend and mentor, Richard Carranza, who has taught me what bold leadership looks like. He is the Chancellor of New York City Department of Education, the largest school system in the nation. He's responsible for educating 1.1 million students in over 1,800 schools. During Carranza's nearly 30 years in education, he has served in virtually every role. Prior to New York City, he was the superintendent of the Houston Independent School District, the largest school district in Texas, and the 7th largest in the United States. Before that, he served the San Francisco Unified School District, first as deputy superintendent and then as superintendent. Before moving to San Francisco, Carranza was a Northwest Region superintendent for the Clark County School District in Las Vegas. He began his career as a high school bilingual social studies and music teacher at his alma mater, Pueblo High School in Tucson, Arizona, where he eventually became the principal. He also started Mariachi Aslan de Pueblo, and for those of you who don't know this already, he has a beautiful mariachi voice. Richard is a 4th generation Tucsonan. He graduated from the University of Arizona. A son of a sheet metal worker and a hairdresser, and a grandson of Mexican immigrants, Carranza credits his public school education for putting him on the path to college and a successful career. He believes that a great education changes lives and is excited to help the next generation of New Yorkers achieve their dreams. As a chancellor, he is building on the city's equity and excellence for all agenda, which supports students academically, socially, and emotionally from early childhood through 12th grade. He is also championing initiatives to help educators strengthen their practice and to empower more parents to become engaged in their children's education. Through his powerful vision and courageous leadership, he has inspired me to be a better advocate for all children. I'm indebted to his kindness and generosity. Thank you, Richard. And now I will introduce our moderator, Danny Portillo, who has served nearly 21 years in education. Prior to her role as Executive Director for Teaching and Learning in the Roosevelt School District in Phoenix, Arizona, she served as a formal bilingual education teacher, elementary principal, and high school principal.
Good morning. Good morning, Chancellor Carranza.
Good morning.
What does modernizing the education system to better serve those who have been less prioritized for generations mean to you?
Well, thank you for the question. And before I answer the question specifically, I want to thank Ylenia, I want to thank Dawn, I want to thank Beth, and obviously you for having me here. And it's an honor to be a panelist with Professor Stovall. I've read some of his work, and I'm a big fan. So I want to thank you. And I would be remiss also if I didn't take a moment to recognize and address what has been top of mind for all of us over the last week. These have been gut-wrenching and quite frankly, heartbreaking days as another pandemic beyond COVID-19 presents itself again on the streets of America. The murder of George Floyd at the hands of police officers last week was infuriating and horrifying to me, as I'm sure it was to many people that are on this webinar. I'm sickened but not surprised, and I think that when we talk about equity and we talk about doing what's right for our children, we cannot forget the institutionalized racist policies and practices that happen everywhere around us. I personally have let every one of the 155,000 employees of the Department of Education know that we stand with Black New Yorkers and Americans. And we are in the process right now of conducting town halls with our students so that they have an outlet to express their moral outrage, but their grief, quite frankly. I just wanted to name that because I know that all of us have experienced that, and I just wanted to name it before I start. So to your question, you know, this pandemic, we never thought we'd end our year this way. But I think it's important because this has given us an opportunity to really think about when people say, when do we get back to normal? The normal post-COVID-19 cannot be the pre-COVID-19 normal, because that normal was never good enough for all of our children. And what this pandemic has allowed us to do, working in the public school systems, is to recognize, because it's right in front of us, the disproportionate impact in New York City that COVID-19 has had in communities of color, our Black community, our Latino community, our poor communities. It's exacerbated and exposed all of the inequity that has been around for generations. And we're seeing it in the disproportionate impact it's having in the very communities that we've known about for generations that have historically been underserved or not served. So for us, what is going to be modernizing is that we actually do something about these things. 65 years after Brown versus Board of Education, what do we have to show for it collectively as an education system in America? I would very humbly say, not much. So how do we take the lessons learned during this pandemic and how do we actually put those into effect so that when we come out of this pandemic, the new normal is a new normal predicated on equity. The new normal is a system where all students are being served. The new normal is not about who maintains and keeps privilege and who doesn't have privilege. The new normal is making sure that students with disabilities and our multilingual learner students and our immigrant students and our communities of color are being well served. So it's going to require us to do many things in a very different way. So as I continue to stress to my colleagues in the Department of Education, we're not talking about normal in the paradigm of the pre-COVID-19 normal. The new normal is challenging us to do something very different that we've talked about, that we've dreamt about, that we've always said we would if we could. Well, now we have to. And I think that's the opportunity that we all have going into whatever the new future looks like.
Thank you. Thank you for those very timely words. So how can superintendents help level the gaps that create equal access to education?
Well, very humbly speaking, I can tell you that I communicate every day with superintendents across the country, my colleagues. And I will say with all due respect to all of the elected leadership in the country, the group of individuals that are truly leading into a new future are the superintendents right now, the public school systems, because we're grappling with right now these incredible, hard, complex questions about inequity, let me give you an example. When we made the decision to transition to remote learning in New York City, that's taking 1.1 million students. It's roughly equivalent to taking all of the students in Los Angeles, all the students in Chicago, and all of the students in Boston, and in a matter of 3.5 days transition to a totally new paradigm for learning and teaching. That's what we had to do in New York City. And then when we looked at those 1.1 million students, when they walked out of the door, we sent 175,000 devices with those students. These are the devices that were in the schools. They were assigned to students, take them with you. But we still had 300,000 students that did not have internet connectivity. So in the span of 2 months, we've now been able to put in the hands of every one of those 300,000 students, 300,000 internet-equipped devices, the digital divide. So it's not a matter of can you do this, but it's a matter of having the will and the political will and the budgetary will to do this. We did that in 2 months in New York City. So The question could be, why didn't you do it before? But I think the question now is, as a superintendent, as a chancellor, how do we take that capacity now that students, regardless of their income, regardless of their zip code, have a device that we've built over these 2.5 months, resources for students and for parents and for teachers. How do we continue to build upon that capacity so that whenever we get back to face-to-face learning, that doesn't get shelved, but we build upon that. And we're able to personalize instruction. And we're able to make instruction meet the needs of students. That we're able to, instead of everybody's on the same page at the same day, we're truly now personalizing, using technology, not to replace a teacher. You'll never replace a well-trained, caring teacher in the classroom, but to augment the tools that a teacher has in his or her tool chest. That's, I think, the opportunity. And that's, I think, what we all can do as system leaders, is to identify where are those gaps, how are we addressing those gaps, and then how do we continue to reprioritize what we used to think was important, because that's part of the old normal, and what is the new normal going to be, and then how do we prioritize our funds, how do we prioritize our organizational structures, and how do we make sure that what we're doing is in pursuit of the new normal, not the old normal. I think that's the focus for us as we go forward.
Thank you. Transitioning over to safety, what can schools do to ensure that students and staff are safe when they return?
You know, this is the big question. This is one of the questions that keeps me up at night. We know that schools are an integral part of the fabric of a city. And a city's going to come back, but who's going to take care of the children? And we look at it as educating children, but from a very practical perspective, when a parent works, their kids need to be somewhere. So schools are part of that fabric of reopening, but there is nothing more precious to an adult than their children. So we have to make sure that schools are safe. So for us, the medical professionals are going to drive that decision of when we come back to in-person learning. One of the things that I like to remind folks in New York City is that school hasn't ended. We never stopped going to school. We just changed the location of where that was happening. But it still means that we have to do more to make sure that school is meeting the needs of our students. So the safety that we're looking at is, how do we maintain social distancing? How do we ensure that we have enough hand washing stations? How do we ensure that we have enough sanitation? How do we ensure that we have the appropriate PPE, personal protection equipment? And then you add to that, how do we then account for students that may have pre-existing conditions or adults that have pre-existing conditions? Because absent a vaccine, how do you know who is an asymptomatic carrier of the virus? You know, just a month ago, none of us were talking about MISC, the multi-symptom inflammatory syndrome in children. But now think about how scary this is, that you have children that are being affected by this syndrome, that are testing positive for antibodies of COVID-19, yet were never symptomatic. So that means that these children were asymptomatic carriers of the virus. Now imagine putting all those children in school together and imagine what could happen. So there's a lot of science that still needs to happen. There's a lot of unanswered questions about what needs to happen before parents will feel comfortable sending their kids back to school, but before we can be comfortable that they will be safe, they will be secure, and that the protocols we have in place won't add to another spike in the transmission of COVID-19. Those are all of the things that we're talking about. I'll add one more thing to this. We know for a fact that students don't only go to school to get an education, right? For many students, especially students in poor communities, that's where they get their meals. So over this 2.5 months that we've been in remote learning, we've set up over 552 meal hubs across the city of New York. Not only students, but parents can come and grab all 3 meals at once. We've served over 20 million meals since March 16th. We're averaging about 560,000 meals a day. But when we transition back into an in-person learning situation, where are students going to eat? CDC has said They don't recommend that you eat in a cafeteria because of the social distancing issues, but also the practical issue that should there be a positive case of COVID-19, then tracking a student that has been in a cafeteria, imagine all of the different connections that would have to get tracked. It's much more practical to have students eat in a classroom, the food comes to them. That sounds great. From time to time in New York City, we have a rat problem. So then how do you deal with the hygiene issues? How do you deal with who cleans the classroom? How do you deal with keeping the food warm and nutritious? Like the logistics of safety and the protocols for safety are complex and they're mind-blowing because we're talking about life and death. But all of those things are things that we're working our way through right now in our goal to open in-person learning or some form of in-person learning by September, which is when our school year traditionally starts.
We're grappling with that here in Phoenix too. In regards to our board members, what policy goals do you recommend to school board leaders to help close the opportunity gap?
Well, I think one of the biggest lessons I think that I would identify is that there's always been an adage that I've held very close as a system leader, whether it was in California, Texas, Nevada, and now in New York. Show me your budget. Don't show me your mission statement. Don't show me your value statement. Show me your budget. I'll show you your priorities. And I think we can all say that the budgets that we've operated under the old normal haven't been reflective of what our priorities should really be. So why is it that in a matter of 2.5 months, we were able to move budgets? We were able to get the city regulations amended to allow us to order 300,000 iPads that are Wi-Fi enabled? Why is it that we've been allowed now to circumvent the purchasing requirements that usually take 6 to 7 months and order hundreds of thousands of pounds of PPE and disinfecting solution, right? So for governance, colleagues that are in the governance realm, I think one of the big lessons is, what are you prioritizing in the new normal that is building upon what you've done to support communities and students during this pandemic? And then how do you continue to build upon that? Is it more device? I'm just using some examples here. Does it mean that you continue to build out your device allocation system? Is it that you continue to build out the resources that are available to not only students, but parents as well? And do you do that in more than one language? The answer to that is yes, yes, and yes. Of course you do that. But then I think even more important is, what do you stop doing, right? Because during this time, we've stopped doing a lot of things that were sacred cows. Whew, we've done that for decades. Well, we're not doing it right now, and the world hasn't stopped. In fact, why should we start doing that if we don't miss it? And why don't we put those efforts into what we do know is making a difference for our students? The other thing that I would say that's going to be very important, because there's a lot of conversation around the downsides of virtual learning, remote learning, blended learning, whatever you call it. And rightfully so. I mean, some students are thriving and some students are struggling in this environment. But what we cannot forget, and this is for the practitioner as well as the governance members of the call, is the socio-emotional supports for our students and our families. Make no mistake, this is a traumatic event. And I can tell you from my experience leading in Houston during Hurricane Harvey, the effects of the trauma of Hurricane Harvey started really manifesting themselves 6 months to 2 years after that event. We aren't even through this event yet. We have seen lots of people die. We have seen teachers and administrators pass away. Everybody knows somebody that knows somebody. So we have to be just as focused on the traumatic-informed curriculum, traumatic-informed supports, as we are about the academic supports for our students. If we do not do that, we are going to lose many of our children in depression and, God forbid, even worse. We have to be attentive to that, and not just our students, but our employees as well. Those are the areas that I would recommend we really need to pay attention as we move to the new normal post-COVID-19.
Chancellor Carranza, we have a question from the audience that articulates exactly with what you're saying. This question is from Alex, and he'd like to know what you can say to districts who don't have the budget or haven't had the budget for a nurse or for counselors, and yet we know these are needed more than ever.
Yeah, and so this is where I think the education community can be more united than ever, because look, we don't, as education leaders, I don't sell a product. I can't raise the price of what I'm selling. I don't sell widgets. We educate souls. So we're dependent on what's allocated to us from state budgets, city budgets, whatever the funding source is. It's not because we're selling something. So we're being invested in. But this is a place where we need to be in a united front, advocating for those kinds of resources for our communities. I had someone say to me, and it wasn't associated with COVID-19, but I had someone say to me, in New York City, I'm almost a little embarrassed because our per pupil expenditure is one of the highest in the nation. And even then, we have tremendous need because we have tremendous poverty. 1.1 million students. Let me just a quick aside to give you, we get blasé in New York because 1.1 million, whatever. Think about it this way. On any given day that New York City schools are in session, 1 out of 300 Americans is sitting in one of our classrooms. Not 1 out of 300 kids, 1 out of 300 people in America are sitting in our classrooms. That's how big the footprint is. And when you think about that, 82% of the students in our school system are students in poverty. So it's poor and it's big. So why is that important? Because if we can, imagine the power of school systems across the country, public school systems uniting with a common agenda with 3 or 4 points that we all say we need this kind of funding. And we are doggedly advocating for that at the state and federal level. Imagine the collective power of those voices saying, we demand that there is a nurse, we demand that there is a social worker, we demand that there are counselors. Imagine the collective power in that. And the story I was going to tell you is that before COVID-19, folks would say, well, you guys already get so much money. Why do you need more money? Why should we raise the per pupil? Because believe it or not, even in New York pre-COVID-19, not every school had a nurse, a full-time nurse, or a full-time social worker. But when I came back to those folks and I said, yeah, you're right. We have $20,000 per student in New York City. We get it, right? New York City is one of the most expensive cities to live in, but we get it. Yeah, you're right. But if you don't invest in students up front, then it costs right now about $189,000 per year to incarcerate juveniles in New York State. So either you're going to invest now or you're going to assuredly pay more later to incarcerate, not to mention the loss of productive citizens, the loss of the tax base, the loss of productivity, all of the economic things that'll happen. So that's the kind of case that I think we need to make. And I think that that's part of the conversations I'm having with my colleagues as we try to get on the same page. I meet speak very regularly with the 72 largest school systems in America as part of the Council of the Great City Schools, and that's a conversation we're having. I also think that this moment in time where America is coming to reckon with the issues of racial discrimination and to see not a black man, but to see a human being killed before our very eyes under the guise of law enforcement. I think you can be pro good police officers, anti bad police officers, and for a social justice agenda all at once. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think that what this is bringing to the forefront is that education in schools is where this will happen, because that is where students need to start grappling with the whole idea of what does it mean to be a citizen of the United States or a resident of the United States, and what does that mean for me? All of these things present, I think, a moment in time that shame on us if we don't capitalize on that opportunity.
And I know sir, that you are a very busy man, so perhaps this next audience question may be where we sign off, but a question comes from Barbara, and she is asking if you could elaborate on what are some of these sacred cows that now are called into question a little bit.
Sure. So, where do I start? So, I would just generously say, this is my 32nd year as an educator, I would generously say that education, public education in the vernacular of the political world has always been much more of a gotcha kind of question, right? It's always been punitive. And by that I mean this: we want students to learn subject matter, right? Whatever the subject matter is, we want students to master subject matter. That's why we're teachers, that's why we're educators. Yet, then why do we set up systems that if the paper is turned in 5 minutes late, it's late, I'm taking points off? Why do we set up systems that say you have to have it in by tomorrow morning, where we know that individuals learn at different paces? Why do we set up structures that say you're going to be penalized because you didn't dot the I's or cross the T's, right? All of these punitive measures on students. Then we exacerbate that by the brilliant idea of saying we're going to evaluate teachers based on student test scores. Yet we know from a psychometric perspective that test scores don't capture the full array of genius that young people have. And we know that youngsters learn at different ways. And we know that formative assessment is what teachers need. Where is my student? What do they need next? What do I need to cover next? And we know that some students are going to get it quickly and some students are going to need some more time. So then how do we structure ourselves to give the student that gets it quickly the opportunity to keep moving, and the student that needs more time the ability to be supported? Guess what? Oh, and then we say, well, we're going to penalize you for being late to class, right? And the kid has to run from one extreme of the building at high school to the other extreme of the high school. And why do they only have 3 minutes to get there? Because the state says you have to have so many minutes in your seat in the classroom. All of these things. But we've accepted them because that's, hey, we had to do it, so now they're going to have to do it. What this has allowed us to do, so the evaluation system, all these systems, what this has allowed us to do, at least here in New York City, is you can't have that kind of an attendance system anymore. So one of the things we did is we amended our attendance policy. We're not doing attendance. What we're doing is engagement. And because we have the technology now, we can tell that engagement counts when you engage. So we know when a student logs in, and we know it's that student because every student has to log in with their own identifiable number. So we know when a student has logged in, boom, you've engaged. We know when a student submits an assignment, you've engaged. We know when a student's been in a Google Classroom, you've engaged. We also know who has not engaged. And that's given our social workers and our parent coordinators and our guidance counselors the ability to follow up with those families and follow up with those students and find out what's going on. We have found out some really tragic things that have happened in some of these families, but it allows us then to bring resources to those students and help them in those circumstances. The other thing was, well, then grades. So what do we do about grades? Some kids didn't get devices for a month and a half. So what do we do about grades? Well, some, and believe me, I did a public engagement process. The spectrum, some people leave it alone, don't touch a thing, my kid is working hard. Other people are saying, but we lost a grandparent and an uncle and the aunt is in the hospital, right? So, and by the way, the student is taking care of their brothers and sisters. So what we said is this: look, if you're working hard, yes, good, but nobody's gonna fail. Oh, clutch the pearls. What do you mean nobody's gonna fail? Yes. How in a traumatic pandemic are you going to tell a kid who hasn't had a device and has had to learn remote learning that you're going to fail because nothing in your control? So students get, at the end of this semester, students that have not met the standards will get a course in progress designation. And then guess what? They get to go to this summer learning to get the time that they need to finish the course. Because the goal is not you finished it in the semester. The goal is you finished, that you demonstrated mastery of the subject matter, right? So people are saying, well, you're just watering it down. No, we're finally doing what we've always learned pedagogically is the right thing to do. You want kids to master standards. That's a sacred cow. Then we talked about evaluation, and people were losing their ever-living mind about how are we going to evaluate teachers and how are we going to evaluate principals? And what I finally said to folks, working with the state Department of Education and making sure that they were going to back me on this. I said, look, the evaluation is this. If you're breathing in and out, congratulations, you've survived the pandemic. Don't worry about evaluation. Worry about how you're going to engage students. Worry about letting us know what we can do to support you with more resources in terms of curriculum and instruction. Worry about checking in on your students. Worry about staying safe and staying inside and taking care of your family. That's what you need to worry about. Don't worry about that other stuff, because that's not going to do a darn thing for kids. Go figure. The world hasn't come to an end in New York City. In fact, our engagement rates, I just got a report yesterday evening, our engagement rates right now are hovering at almost 89%. 89% of the 1.1 million students. So I'm still concerned about the 11% that are not, but that's pretty darn good. So those are some of the sacred cows that I'm talking about. I could take another hour to talk about the centralized sacred cows that we're just not doing anymore. So, but those are some on the ground, in the field kinds of examples of sacred cows that, look, we don't miss them.
Absolutely. And I think we could happily listen to you for another hour, but I know you need to go. So I wanted to thank you and give you an opportunity to say any last words on our presentation today.
Well, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and it's just a real pleasure. And it's always good to see my home state, Arizona, out there. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. Everyone, be safe. I know for a fact that we will all look back one day and say, you know, 2020, COVID-19, this was one of the most challenging time periods in our lives. But I have no doubt we'll also be able to say, if we keep our eye on the prize, the new normal, not the old normal, that we're going to say this was our finest hour. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so it is an honor to introduce another friend and mentor, Dr. David Stovall, a professor of African American Studies and Criminology, Law, and Justice at the University of Illinois at Chicago. His scholarship investigates three areas: critical race theory, the relationship between housing and education, and the intersection of race, place, and school. In the attempt to bring theory to action, he works with community organizations and schools to address issues of equity, justice, and abolishing the school-prison nexus. His work led him to become a member of the design team for the Greater Lawndale Little Village School for Social Justice, which opened in the fall of 2005. Furthering his work with communities, students, and teachers, his work manifests itself in his involvement with the People's Education Movement, a collection of classroom teachers, community members, students, and university professors in Chicago, Los Angeles, and the San Francisco Bay Area, who engage in collaborative community projects centered in creating relevant curriculum. In addition to his duties and responsibilities as a professor at University of Illinois, Chicago, he also served as a volunteer social studies teacher at the Greater Lawndale Little Village School for Social Justice from 2005 to 2018. He may not remember this, but I met him back when I was undocumented. I got to see him present at a summer institute at the University of Arizona, and his words were so impactful and have helped shape my views towards social justice and education, and that is the reason why I'm here today. Thank you, Dr. Stovall.
Again, thank you all so much for having me. And Ilenia, I really appreciate you putting me on with Chancellor Carranza and really allowing us to hear some possibilities that I think a lot of folks are fearful of and need at the same time to engage.
And I will introduce the moderator, Danny Portillo, who will be asking the questions.
Good morning, Professor Stovall. What can our leaders do to educate our students regarding the current police brutality and racism towards African American communities? And I'm referring to our school leaders.
Yep. And I think this is a thing that I think really becomes important. And thank you for that question. I think it becomes critical for school leaders to understand this particular precarious relationship that Black communities, many Latinx communities have had with the police. And we often assume those communities, those relationships to first be friendly. And that's not the case, right? And I think when we actually start there, now we can start to engage student voice. We can start to ask folks about how they understand these relationships, and then what the possibilities are given the young people's understanding of these particular relationships. And I think there, where you all are in Arizona, there's an important connection that people have in terms of people being accosted for different reasons, but the same type of hypersurveillance and engagement in similar ways. So this is a real opportunity to make that connection of particular struggles for people to see what these things are. And I think it's really important for school leaders, because this is not pro forma to what people would think about school and activities in schools. Now we have to think about what it means for a young person coming into a place that constantly reminds them of how much it hates them. Man, and when you think about the trauma of that, and when you think about what it means to exist under those realities, once that young person walks outside of the school, their lives could be precarious. But we have to take it a step further. In some schools, being in school with the presence of a resource officer, or in some cases, the actual police, is just as precarious. So now it's important for school leaders to take this into account and begin to think about some things. And I will put this suggestion out because I just saw this from Minneapolis. The Minneapolis School District just ended its contract with the Minneapolis Police Department. So essentially, for you all in Arizona, they essentially got rid of all school resource officers. It's something, and people think about that, that's one of the sacred cows. And now when we start to think about this, what does it mean to engage and end that contract and reappropriate those dollars to what young folks need in terms of counseling, wraparound services, extracurricular support, athletics? And I think these are the types of things that school leaders can begin to engage as not as some impossibility, but literally as an example that they can look to in other spaces. Because this is the question that I think school leaders have to ask this. Do police make you safer? And the answer, I would argue, is going to come out in a very different way. And when you talk to young people, that answer is going to come out in a very different way. And then school leaders can invert that answer and say, what would make you feel safe and wanted in this environment? See, that's a question that we don't ask young folks because we're fearful of the answer, right? Because young people will tell us, no, I do not feel safe. No, I do not feel accepted. No, I do not feel like I am feeling feelings of love in this space. I feel contained. I feel marginalized. I feel that this place is supportive of my death before supportive of my life, right? So those things, and again, for school leaders, you can't fear that question. One of my mentors, Bill Ayers, always says, we have to be willing to go into the contradiction. And in the contradiction, we will see ourselves. So now this is the moment, I think, for school leaders to think about that and not fear the repercussions. Because I think a lot of times when you get into the leadership capacities, people often fear, oh, this could mean the end of my space. Who are you there for? Right? I mean, it's a very simple question. And I think we have to be clear about that, because if you are there for young people, the naysayers will come. But at the same time, you can demonstrate what you're willing to do in capacity to serve the people that you say you care about, right? And I think that's the way, I think, for us to really understand the current moment, but also when we talk about things like school safety and the relationship to police.
Thank you. Thank you. So as you know, students' overall opportunity for their future is affected by multiple factors, both inside and outside of school. And of course, addressing opportunity requires us to look at inputs as much as outputs. So we believe that reimagining schools and pivoting should be part of the solution. Then what should be the first priority for superintendents as they're planning a return back to school in the fall?
Right, and I think this thing around, not even the new normal, right? I think normal is folks in disability studies often remind us that normal is a problematic term, right? So we don't even want normal, right? We want something different. We want something that is of use. We want something that is of utility to the people that we care about. I think in coming back, now we have to think about who are our most marginalized young folks and how do we dedicate resources to them, right? Because that's the equity equation, because a lot of times people misconstrue equity and equality, right? Equity is getting people what they need because they need it. Now, all the truths have been laid bare. The COVID moment has told us and showed us who has been the most excluded. The COVID moment has showed us the rationales for their exclusion and death. So now, as folks are entering the school year, now this is the time to rethink where those priorities lie. How do you get those spaces, those priorities, those resources, I should say, to the folks who have historically been denied them, right? And that's a shift of thinking, right? And it's a different type of engagement with parents, right? So where you are in Arizona, I know that you all do something very interesting there where cities are chopped up in terms of school districts, where in the Midwest and East, it's just kind of one large district. And I remember first coming to Phoenix and just being so surprised by that and saying like, what, I got 13 districts, how does that work, right? So this thing around thinking about that. But I think one of the things that school leaders is at the superintendent level. So when the naysayer parents come to them and say, well, I feel like my son or daughter's resources are getting taken away from them, that school leader will have to say, look, your son and daughter is going to be all right regardless. The concern here is the people who have been excluded. And if I consider myself someone who is engaging in justice-centered education, then I have to prioritize them. I will not ignore the needs of those young people, but my priority is to making sure that those who have been excluded will no longer be excluded and will be in the center of the conversation, right? And I think that's what this reconfiguration could allow us to do, right? But again, to you all's point earlier, I feel like the window is very small for us to actually engage this, right? The time is short. So I think this is a moment to begin to think about what that reprioritization looks like. But again, we have to do it now, right? There's no time to waste in terms of reconfiguring how we understand schools, especially at the leadership level.
Thank you. As you know, our Betsy DeVos and other state leaders are pushing to divert pandemic funds aimed to help K-12 public school students to a privatized school via vouchers or microgrants, regardless of the students' income levels. AZ has more voucher programs than any other state except for Florida. Do you believe vouchers will help us reimagine education, or do you think that they'll cause more harm?
I am of the school of thought that they will cause more harm for this reason. Voucher programs are still based around access. And this is what I mean by that. So there are only certain families who can access voucher programs. There are all these conscriptions on the programs, right? So now you have to be able to access those voucher programs because, and this thing, and I just think about this simply, vouchers do not by any shape or form address the solution. In fact, Betsy DeVos is quick to forget, and many times our memory in the United States is short. Betty DeVos often forgets that when they push vouchers in Michigan, the first grouping of families that applied and got vouchers were rich white families. And then they got sued, and it was found that that process was unconstitutional, right? So this thing is, so now as this vouchers is the great equalizer, by no shape or form have we seen any data that is reflective of that. What we have seen, although, is that this can be divisive even in families in terms of who has access to educational resources. And I think those, because it's not well planned or thought out, this throwing money at the problem is often looked at the solution, and it is not. It's the furthest thing from a solution, especially when we're talking about those who have been the most marginalized.
Thank you, sir. Those are the questions that we prepared for you, but I think our audience has some questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Stovall. As an educator, I have many of these questions myself, and we're getting some great questions from educators around the state asking how schools can use this opportunity to start incorporating better social justice curriculum at this time. Some questions, overarching questions about getting access to the curriculum, any recommendations around curriculum, and first steps for moving forward with really just being there for our young people and making them feel more comfortable.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I think one of the things for all the teachers, and thank you for your work. It is underappreciated work. It is unappreciated work. And it is this moment in time is really the opportunity to lift up your work. I think it's important to say that outright. I think there are, in this moment, it really, and I work with a couple of community organizations here in Chicago, this is a real moment for us to understand mutual aid. And what I mean by mutual aid is people being able to share resources with each other. So a good friend of mine used to crack a joke when we taught. He would always say, a good teacher is a good thief. You just got to give credit for where you got it from, right? So this thing around how we now begin to look at resources across states, across counties, across school districts around people who are doing things. And there's a couple examples of that. So if you look at the San Francisco Unified School District, they have 3 through lines in their curricular focus now that I think are really important and allow for folks to engage work at a number of different levels. And they have this requirement that each classroom, no matter the content area, needs to demonstrate solidarity, knowledge of self, and injustice, right? So now how do we begin to look at those spaces? I think another thing that becomes important in terms of, and a lot of that was actually based in an ethnic studies approach, but an ethnic studies approach across content area. I think that's really important because a lot of times people just put this in English language arts and social studies, and that's the wrong couching. So when we actually look at this, it's across content area because the main question is really asking young people around how these content areas connect to our lives. And I think this is the moment to shift things to begin to center those questions. Another thing, and I think this is really important, and the Chancellor broke this down, we can begin to think about the end of high-stakes standardized testing. The University of California system just scraped the SAT and ACT in their admission requirements, right? So now we can't push this lie on young people and say, well, hey, you got to think about the ACT and SAT. If you look at schools on the Eastern Seaboard, many of them have gotten rid of ACT or SAT requirements, right? And we got to ask this, we got to come to grips with this deeper question, right? High stakes testing is rooted in the broader project of white supremacy in the form of eugenics and colonization, right? If we don't start there, then we will continue that process, right? So now it's really around interrupting this process that has only worked as a sorting machine. As the Chancellor said, no one is the worst that folks didn't take their Arizona State, blah, blah, whatever you all call it in Arizona, right? No one is worse here in Illinois that we didn't take our Illinois standards test, right? No one is worse. No one has died because of standardized testing, right? Here's the moment, scrape it. Another thing, to rethink assessment. What if we got rid of letter grades? What if we started to look at engagement and what people refer to as performance-based assessment that, you know, and in teaching, we got all this slick language, right? Project-based work, right? But this thing around what does it mean and how do we demonstrate how young people have engaged in their work? And there's a guy named Monty Neal who started an organization called Fair Test, and they have a performance-based assessment rubric in terms of work. So I think these are tools that teachers can use in terms of rethinking their work, because, you know, San Francisco Unified, Fair Test, and then other folks are creating work that is allowing for folks to rethink the arc of education, right? And I think in this moment, this is the time to rethink the difference between school and education, right? School is the order and compliance, right? You know, the thing is, you survive school, right? But you engage, thrive, and change if we are pursuing education, right? Because that's everybody, teachers included, who are involved in the educative process, right? We are learning as teachers if education is working, right? So I think that becomes important. So I think those resources are tangible examples, because for, you know, some of the folks who are listeners or in very small districts, you can feel isolated. And I think the thing is to be able to borrow from folks who are doing existing work, who are always willing to share, and now bring that to your respective district.
Thank you. I have a feeling teachers all around our great state are cheering your responses there. So thank you. Mm-hmm. We have a question from the superintendent of Tucson Unified School District, actually, is here, Gabriel Trujillo. Thank you. He asked, when the majority of the school district's workforce, particularly its teaching workforce, does not match the demographics of the district ethnically or socioeconomically, the embrace and acceptance of culturally responsive pedagogy in terms of professional development and curriculum can be a challenge and is often met with resistance by the workforce majority, particularly with teachers and school front office employees that might interact with the public. So with that, what are some strategies you've seen to be effective for school districts who are looking to implement high quality professional development in this area system-wide, particularly for resistant, people?
Yeah. And for Superintendent Trujillo, it's good to hear from you. Now, this, I think, is important because now we have to be clear around what the work is. And I think this is key. There's some parts to this work. The first part to this work is to recognize the resistant population, right? That was those folks who are resisting, the folks who work in the front office, the folks who are in classrooms, even some of the principals, I think we have to have real talk about that. The second piece that I think is important is around what do you do to infuse new ways of understanding and doing. The third, you have to be prepared when the resistance comes, when they plot and plan against you. So this is where, people think about this as superintendent sticking your neck out, but not necessarily. It's literally around saying, what is the work here? And again, with me having some history over the last 15 years with Tucson Unified, there was an understanding when ethnic studies and raza studies actually was used in a school district. What did we see? We saw the highest gains with the young people who were in Rasa Studies classes. They were getting gains in classes that Rasa Studies didn't even touch, right? How did Rasa Studies students get gains in math, right? So this thing around now, particularly in Tucson, the groundwork has been laid. Now, oftentimes, it is about us returning to that history and saying and being just forthright and saying, look, if you are serious about the education of the young people in these buildings, here are the things that we need to do. The fourth thing, you got to be clear about shifting who's in that teaching force. You got all those brown babies in Tucson who are ready to be in people's classrooms. You need to make a pathway for them to get there. That's the work. I apologize that I don't have anything nice or slick to say, but the history has been laid. We must be responsible to that history, and we must return to that in the work moving forward, because the naysayers will come. You have to expect them. I used to crack a joke with my students. I was like, look, when the feds come, just remember we on page 48. If I'm gone for more than 3 hours, I've been taken in a state of extreme rendition. You know who to call, right? Because the thing is, we can't be worried about the opposition. The work is the work. Make the claim to the work. Be fearless in that claim, right? And actually build out community with the folks who will hold you and protect you when the naysayers come, right? And I think that's a really important piece. And TUSD has a history where those folks who did that work were not protected. Now's the opportunity to engage in redress. What does it mean to do right by the folks who have been marginalized and excluded? I think that's critically important in this moment.
Thank you so much for those words. I know they ring very true for me this week, and I'm sure all around the state. I'm just thinking of my students and the work that needs to be done, and it will be a heavy lift, but I'm very excited to get going with it, and I think so many people on this chat are as well. So thank you for your advice and your words of fearlessness. We had another great question that's very similar and I think ties in well. Can social justice curriculum be effective if teachers do not address their own conscious or unconscious biases?
Right. Very simple question. Very simple answer, right? Good question, simple answer. No, right? If you are not prepared to engage your own contradictions, right? And not even implicit bias, because I don't even like implicit bias, right? Bias means that it's informed by something. We got to dig deep to understand what our biases are informed by. And we have to confront them. And we have to confront them in terms of what it is that we do not know, right? And I think to me, that's the essence of teaching, right? Right? Because, I graduated high school 30 years ago, right? I can't walk into a group of high schoolers and say, well, yeah, this is what we did in 1990. What? No, that's not going to work, right? What we have to do is be aware. And I think as I get older, I have to be more aware of the things that I do not know, right? And then because that's where the learning starts, right? So if I'm aware of the things that I do not know, then I'm much more in tune to engage in what I need to learn, right? So now students can see that they are educating me and then we're doing something together, right? So we talk about a collaborative process. And I think this is key, right? So if you miss it completely, if you think you are coming in a classroom without confronting yourself and you talking about doing any type of justice-centered education, right, that is a fail complete, right? I can guarantee that one, right? I can't guarantee a whole lot of other things in life, but that one I can guarantee. But so I think it becomes important for us to really start to engage those spaces that make us uncomfortable and that we do not know.
Absolutely. Thank you. I know that we are running out of time and I want to respect your time. Are there any parting words that you want to leave us with, Dr. Stovall?
Well, first, I want to thank Elenia for getting me in this space. I know without her, I would not be in this space. I want to thank you all for doing the work that you do in the way that you do it. And I want to thank you all again for advocating for young folks fearlessly and relentlessly. And to all the listeners, I just say, remember, the time is short for us to engage this thing, and we have an opportunity to do it. I hope that we move accordingly, and I hope we move in not only good faith, but with the understanding of centering the lives of those who have been excluded.
Thank you. It has been such an honor to be part of this amazing dialogue, and I know I speak for Elenia and Don, but we are just so grateful to our panelists, Chancellor Carranza and Professor Stovall, to our moderator, Danny Portillo, to our co-sponsor, Elenia Aguilar of Strategies 360 Cultura, and for all of you who attended. If you are looking for follow-up information mentioned during today's talk, if you'd like to attend upcoming web events, we have a speaker series throughout the summer. And if you'd like to learn more about Save Our Schools Arizona Network, you can visit our website at sosarizonanetwork.org or find us on Facebook or Twitter. I hope that you'll all stay safe, stay focused, and be well, and prepare ourselves for the difficult work that needs to be done. Thank you for your inspiring words.